that he is in no way required to comment on the particular detail of a matter relating to the ACT Party. So I'd invite the Honourable Leader of the Opposition, or was it a primary question that led to was a supplementary question? So that the House can remember what the question was, I would invite the Honourable Leader of the Opposition to repeat the question. The Honourable Gerry Brownlee.
Mr. Speaker, I think given your ruling, I think it would be useful now if you were able to give us a steer on what 1461 now means. It reads, the Prime Minister is not responsible for the decisions of another party, but she, it was in the case of Helen Clark, may address the question as long as she does not address the other party's attitude on it. Now, we all know, whether we want to dance around the words here or not, that we are talking about the attitude of another party to a particular set of circumstances. And, Mr. Speaker, in that event, I think this ruling almost seems slightly contradictory to the advice you've just offered the House.
No, I don't need further help on this one, because we must not take further time of the House today on this. I would argue, and I accept fully the Leader of the House is raising important issues, but I'd argue that this is not a decision of another party. This is one of the Prime Minister's ministers that is being the judgment of one of the Prime Minister's ministers. And remember, I've made it very clear that the standing orders make it very clear that the Prime Minister is responsible for the behaviour and conduct and therefore the judgment of all his ministers, regardless of their party affiliations. They are all ministers, and the Prime Minister is accountable for all those ministers, regardless of their party. So one can argue, I believe, reasonably, the Prime Minister has a responsibility with respect to the judgment of all those ministers. Now, in answering the question, though, I do accept the Prime Minister can be very careful and need not trespass on the affairs of another party. It does make answering the question very difficult, I accept that, and I don't pretend that's easy. But if I were to rule that entire question out, I believe I would be contravening that fundamental responsibility of a Prime Minister. And that's why I'm ruling in this way. I'm not, and I make it very clear that I'm not seeking to shift the goalposts on this at all, or the dividing lines on this at all. The Prime Minister is not responsible for leaders of other parties. He's not responsible for political party issues or for leaders' issues. This is a matter, though, of the judgment of one of his ministers, and he is responsible for that, but not for the detail of what went on in a party. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
To the Prime Minister, how was it good judgment for his minister, Mr Hyde, to have covered up his law and order spokesman, Mr Garrett's theft of a dead baby's identity?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, with regard to Mr Hyde's portfolio responsibilities, I believe he's exercised good judgment.
That's not what you said.
Point of order, Mr.
Point of order, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr Speaker, I think as you acknowledge or you recognised, the Prime Minister didn't answer the question, which was how that action showed good judgment on the part of his minister.
The difficulty I have with this is, as I've pointed out, the Prime Minister is responsible for his minister's conduct beyond their portfolio responsibilities. And so I would ask the Prime Minister to respond a little more broadly than that, because he is responsible for his ministers beyond just their portfolio responsibilities. He has a wider accountability for his ministers.
Point of order.
The Honourable Gerry Brownlee.
Mr Speaker.
Order. I apologise to the Minister. This is a very serious issue. And the Opposition should, in my view, respect the fact that the Speaker is putting a fair bit of pressure on the government here over an issue that is important to the Opposition. If they don't want to close it down totally, they'll respect that. The Honourable Gerry Brownlee.
Mr Speaker, a few moments ago you advised that the Prime Minister did not need to answer questions that related to actions or activities that were to do with any particular member or minister's role as a leader of a political party. Now, the question from Mr Goff asked specifically about, related specifically to about the activities of a leader in accepting a position related to a member. The Prime Minister,
Order.
quite rightly...
I think I've heard the member sufficiently.
Contradicted yourself.
No, I've heard the member sufficiently. Look, I've stressed on several occasions the Prime Minister is responsible for the general conduct of his ministers. There's no questioning that. The Prime Minister is responsible for more than their judgment and conduct with respect to their portfolio responsibilities. To me, an answer is not, while I say it's a bit tricky and a bit difficult, to me an answer is fairly obvious, that with avoiding the specific detail of the question, it was not totally necessary to try and confine the answer to portfolio responsibilities, because that was dodging, I do accept, dodging the question pretty clearly. And I think it's not unreasonable to ask the Prime Minister to respond, to answer the question as it was asked, and not try to confine it just to portfolio responsibilities, because the Prime Minister has responsibility more widely than that. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Gerry Brownlee.
Speaker, that seems a most unreasonable position, because the question started with how was that in exercise of good judgment? Well, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister can only judge his ministers on their performance as ministers. And to start widening it out, to say that the Prime Minister has some sort of jurisdiction over all sorts of other aspects of ministers, or for that matter, members of their party's lives, I think is extremely dangerous territory to run into. I don't think we should allow that question. I think the Prime Minister answered very clearly. In his experience, Mr. Hyde has exercised good judgment in the discharge of his portfolio responsibilities. Now, how clear can that be?
Well, I don't need further assistance on this, because we're taking a great deal of time. A Prime Minister under our constitutional arrangements who's not prepared to take responsibility for the conduct and behaviour of his ministers is not fulfilling the role, because our requirements are that a Prime Minister is responsible for the conduct, and not just within portfolio areas, the general conduct of all his ministers. Parties have got nothing to do with this. That is a responsibility of the Prime Minister. Now, I would have thought it not difficult for the Prime Minister to answer that he does have general confidence in his minister's judgment. That's not constraining it to the portfolio responsibilities, and it's avoiding the detail of to do with the ACT Party. I wouldn't have thought it was that difficult to find an answer to the question. The Honourable Rodney Hyde.
Listen, I know we're taking up a lot of time, Mr. Speaker, but you may have missed that in the process of the point of order, Mr. Goff changed his question. So his first question was about the ACT Party's decision to have Mr. Garrett as a candidate. The second question that Mr. Goff put was then to allege somehow that myself covered something up. Now, it might be true that it might...
Order. No. The member is staying now to debate the issue, the substance of the question asked, and that's what leads to disorder, and we're not going to have that. I don't believe the Leader of the Opposition did ask, as the member suggests, as the first supplementary, what the honourable member had done as Leader of the ACT Party. I don't, because the Prime Minister clearly have no responsibility for that whatsoever, and if I got that wrong, I do apologise to everyone concerned, but I don't believe I got that wrong. I'll check the Hansard too, and certainly apologise to the House if I got that wrong. But the point that I cannot allow the House to avoid is the Prime Minister's responsibility for the judgment of all his ministers, and not just in their portfolio areas. Their conduct and behaviour and judgment is a matter for which the Prime Minister is responsible. But he does not have to go into any great detail at all about this particular issue. He's only responsible for the judgment of his ministers in general terms, not on any particular issue.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Point of order, the Honourable Rodney Hyde.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sorry, I may not have expressed it well. My point was this. To allege a cover-up is to suggest an action. It would suggest that a person, as a minister, did something to hide it. Now, there's plenty of things that we know about MPs that we don't tell others about. That's not covering up.
Order. The Prime Minister is perfectly capable of, in my view, of answering the question. He doesn't need to go into any of that sort of stuff. The question doesn't require him to do that at all. The question purely